Hello, everybody. Welcome into the live edition of the Phillip Jordan podcast. We are going to do a live reaction show to the first college football playoff rankings. A lot of interesting stuff here. I'm Phillip Jordan from Last Word on College Football on 96.9 The Legend in Dothan, Alabama. It's not just going to be me here tonight. I do have Brendan Eisman, also from Last Word on College Football, LSU Breakdown, Beyond the Bleachers podcast. He'll be on. Hopefully, we can bring in just some different people coming in from Last Word on College Football, other places. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. Kind of a first time thing doing this, a live show, live podcast. Of course, if you jump in and out of this thing, we will have the audio version up as a podcast, or you can just go through. We're on live on my personal Facebook page. We're live on YouTube as well, and on Twitter at PJordanSEC. So I do hope plenty of people will be coming in, coming out of here. A lot of stuff to unpack here. Brandon Eisman will be on here shortly. He just texted me. He will be joining me for a duration of this thing. We'll see how long it goes. We won't go past 7 o'clock Central Time. I wanted to get on here 15 minutes early just to kind of unpack some things, figure out some other things too that's going on with these rankings. It's the first one. It's always very exciting. I think the most exciting ones obviously are the first ones, and then you have the last ones. And it was a big weekend in college football this past weekend. Of course, the big game was Michigan State. Michigan State winning that one 37-33. Got a little notes here on these teams that we're going to be talking about here. You got to expect Georgia is going to be number one. There's no question here. And I've got it on TV, so we're just waiting for them to come up. I would just figure, no suspense. Let's just go ahead, announce Georgia at number one. But 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ohio State, Oregon, where they're going to put. Will they put Ohio State ahead of Oregon? Will Oregon go over them? Because, Oregon did beat them. They both have one loss, but Oregon did win that one. And when you look at their resumes, now beating Penn State, now you look at a Penn State team that's got a few losses on their resume now. They've dropped all the way to 22nd. Where would that land? 3 losses now for them. They've lost to Iowa. They lost to Illinois. Now they've lost to Ohio State. So that win is still a good win, but not a great win for the Buckeyes. And then when you look at Oregon, they beat Ohio State, but they lost to Stanford. They've had some close calls too as well. Where will the committee put Oregon? Will they value that win over Ohio State and put them over? Will they say, hey, look, we think Ohio State has improved as the season goes on, which that does happen with the committee. Where will Cincinnati be in the AP and in the coaches poll? They are number 2. Where will they put them in this one? That's going to be intriguing as well to see. So Oklahoma, a lot of close calls. Where are they going to put them? So a lot of interesting things. And now we got Brandon is now connected into the studio. So let me bring Brandon in now. Brandon, man, how's it going? Kind of already got started here on the show. Just dissect some of this stuff. How's it going, man?
It's going, Phillip. For some reason, I'm still having computer issues at work. It's just being slow. But other than that, it's going, man. I'm ready for these rankings to drop.
So, what is your for? Because I was kind of talking about it there. I think it's interesting on this thing. Where will they put Ohio State, Oregon? Where will that line up? And as we have our third member here, I'll go ahead and bring Mike in. How's it going, Mike?
Hey, Phillip, how you doing?
Doing good. I got you and Brandon here. We are live. Me and Brandon were just about to jump in our thoughts. And I kind of just jump Brandon and Mike too as well. As we get these rankings, of course, that will start at 6 o'clock. I would assume they're just going to go ahead and announce Georgia number 1. I guess, Mike, I'll go start you. Then Brandon, just what's kind of like the biggest thing you're looking for in the rankings tonight?
So I don't know about me, but I think what most people are looking for the most is to see where Cincinnati's at. I think that's the big question. And I don't think they're going to be in the top 4. I'll give you about 6 reasons why. The first 4 reasons are Georgia, Alabama, Michigan State, and Oklahoma. And the last 3 reasons are UCF, UCF, and UCF. I just don't think the committee is going based on the historical actions of the committee. And I know there's a rotation of people on the committee every year, but I just don't think Cincinnati is going to be in the top 4. I actually don't even think they're going to be in the top 6 yet. If you look at teams, obviously Georgia won, but you still have several undefeated Power 5 teams. Michigan State has a great resume. Oklahoma's undefeated. I think they'll have Alabama and Ohio State over Cincinnati. But here's the other thing about Cincinnati. I don't think the committee wants to paint themselves into a corner with Cincinnati. It's much easier to put a one-loss Ohio State or a one-loss Alabama or even, quite frankly, a one-loss Michigan above Cincinnati. Let Cincinnati play out the rest of the season, go undefeated, win their conference. It's easier for them to jump an undefeated team in Week 13, championship week, than it is to maybe jump a one-loss Ohio State or a one-loss Alabama over an undefeated Cincinnati at the end of the season. So I think the committee is going to leave themselves plenty of room with Cincinnati to maybe if Cincinnati earns the bid at the end of the season, the committee will do it at the end of the season. They're not going to put them in the top 4 now, and with the possibility of having to bump them down even if they don't lose going out. Historically, we've seen with UCF. UCF has had better teams and better seasons and better resumes to this point, and they still really didn't even crack the top 4. And based on the committee chairperson's responses in multiple seasons, they weren't even really that close. So I just don't see Cincinnati being in the top 4 tonight. I don't even think they're in the top 6 tonight. And quite frankly, I think they still don't own. I still don't think they control their own destiny with respect to the committee and how they rank them. Brandon, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, Mike, I fully agree with you. I'm not really sold on Cincinnati being in the top 4 tonight either. You look at Oklahoma, you look at Michigan State, you look at Alabama, you look at Ohio State too. I just think those teams are better than Cincinnati. I mean, who has Cincinnati beaten so far up to this point that helps them deserve a spot in the top 4 tonight? Notre Dame. To me, that's it. I don't think they'll be in the top 6 either. But if I had to give my preliminary top 4 before the rankings are released here, I'd go Georgia at 1, obviously. 2's kind of tough. I'd probably go Oklahoma and then Bama at 3, and I'd go Michigan State at 4.
Yeah, and I'm kind of interested too on the whole Oregon-Ohio State discussion. Like, how are they going to tackle that? Because Oregon beat them and pretty handily. That was a convincing win by Oregon going into Ohio State and winning that game. But you could also see the argument: well, has Ohio State improved? And then Oregon would have lost to Stanford, and honestly being punished because they are a Pac-12 team. So I'm kind of curious too with that one. Where are they going to go? Will they rank Ohio State over Oregon, or will they give Oregon the edge because of the head-to-head?
Phillip, that's a great point. I think, again, going back to the historical actions by the committee, two points that you bring up, 2 great points. One, if you look at Ohio State, the committee historically has talked about how a team looks. Ohio State's looked much better. They've clearly improved since the Oregon game. And these big-time programs, Ohio State and Alabama, have historically generally been given mulligans for one quasi-poor loss on the season. So that's interesting. The other thing, to your point, that I'm looking forward to is for the first 4 weeks of the CFP rankings, really those teams 10 through 25 are key, because that's what the committee will rank, or that's what the committee will use for those quality wins. Brandon talked about Cincinnati not having any quality wins. Where does the committee rank Notre Dame? If Cincinnati's out of the top 6, then clearly you would expect Notre Dame to be a little bit lower in that top 25. So it's always interesting. Me, I'm an SEC guy. I think the committee actually overrates those SEC teams 12 through 25. Teams that I think are probably 18, 20, 22 end up being like 14, 16, 18. And I think that helps. Obviously, that helps, one-loss Alabama or potentially a one-loss Michigan or one-loss Ohio State if those Big Ten teams get that Power 5 conference bump, which the committee has historically done. So I think tonight what most people are going to be looking for is Cincinnati, but I think what most people should be looking for is that 10 through 25 and see how those mid-level Power 5 conference teams like Texas A&M, Ole Miss, those types of teams, not Wisconsin, but Iowa, your one-loss Big Ten teams, Oklahoma State. Speaking of Oklahoma, where's that Oklahoma State team at ranked? Or are they ranked 8th or are they ranked 12th? They could be anywhere. They really could be anywhere from 7th to 15th, really. So I think most people will be looking for Cincinnati, but what most people should be looking for is where those mid-level Power 5 teams are in the 10 to 25 range.
How about you, Brandon?
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I think everybody's going to be looking at Cincinnati. but 10 through 25 is where you should really be looking. And Oregon, the Oregon and Ohio State situation, to me is going to be interesting too to see, which one is ranked ahead of, which one in that perspective. But obviously, we know Georgia's going to be number one. It's just really the top four, and then Oregon, Ohio State, Cincinnati, and then 10 through 25 after that for me.
So we do have a little bit of a viewer comment here earlier. Justin Mahon, he put his top out there. He's got Georgia number 1, I think it's Alabama number 2, Michigan State 3, Cincinnati at 4, Ohio State 5. So he's getting. That's interesting too. Michigan State. I don't think you got to mention them too as well. What they've done, they're undefeated. An undefeated Michigan State team in the Big Ten who. Honestly, you can argue has a better win than Ohio State does, but it's a lot of times too you worry about these things. Name brand. What's your name brand? Because we got Wake Forest, who's an undefeated ACC team. The AP and the coaches have them at 10 right. One is at 10, one is at 9. They've got them in Michigan, kind of flipped to that 9 and 10 spot. So it's also about the brand name here. Honestly, that's what happens a lot of times. You look at the name on the jersey. Where they're at, I'll be interested where Michigan State's going to be at when they release these things tonight.
Phillip, I think it's a good question. I think Michigan State's going to be at 2. If you look at the undefeated teams, Michigan State's got the best. I think the best win over Michigan, other than Oklahoma. Wake Forest really hasn't played anybody. Kind of an impressive win against Army. They could get stopped. The offense was impressive. But I think Michigan State ends up at number 2. I think they got the best win of the other undefeateds, not named Georgia. They're in they're in the second best conference in the Big Ten. The other thing with Michigan State, again, I think that the committee always wants to leave themselves options for later in the season. When they do these early season rankings, they want to leave themselves options. When you put Michigan State at 2, they still got a couple big games, particularly later on in the season with Ohio State. So that gives. Putting Michigan State at 2 is a very low risk for the committee because Michigan State will either play themselves into that 2 position or they will play themselves out of that number 2 position. Going back to my comment about Cincinnati, if you put Cincinnati in the top 4, you don't really leave. Cincinnati may not play themselves into the top 4. They may also play themselves out of the top 4. So it doesn't leave the committee a lot of options. I think Michigan State at 2 is where you'll see them, and I think that's the reason is because it leaves the committee a lot of options.
Any thoughts for you, Brandon, on that?
Yeah, it does leave the committee a lot of options. I mean, I think Michigan State is definitely going to be in the top 4, but you've also got undefeated Oklahoma. You've got one lost Alabama. So it's just to me, it's really just seeing where these teams stack up. I think Michigan should be at 2, but I kind of feel like, just in my personal opinion, for whatever reason, Oklahoma's going to be up there at 2. But yeah, Michigan State's definitely going to be in the top 4. No question. And then Cincinnati and everybody else, wherever.
Yeah, the Oklahoma thing's interesting too because look, they've had a lot of close calls this year. I mean, Tulane, doesn't have a good record. Kansas, the worst team, obviously a year in year out in the Big 12. I mean, Texas is their best win, who's 4-4 now. I mean, I think 3 weeks in a row Texas has blown like a double-digit lead to somebody. So they're 4-4. Now I know when you look at Oklahoma down the road, they've got to go at Baylor. They have Iowa State, who's not as good this year as we thought they would be. They go to Oklahoma State, and of course, they're a rematch with somebody down the road in the Big 12 championship game. And with Oklahoma, they have looked better since Caleb Williams has become the quarterback versus Spencer Rattler. They look like the offense is clicking like it should be, which I feel like Lincoln Riley never trusted Spencer Rattler. The deep balls are a little bit more prevalent there with Oklahoma now. So Oklahoma, will they look at what they've had a lot of close games? Will they punish them for that?
I don't know if they punish Oklahoma too bad for that. I actually think Oklahoma comes in at 4. I think it's going to be Georgia, Michigan State, Alabama, Oklahoma at 4. I think you see Michigan probably at Michigan, Ohio State maybe at 5 and 6, and then I think you probably see Cincinnati at 7. So I don't think Oklahoma gets punished too much for those close wins. 1, they are looking a little bit better. 2, they have a history with the committee. They're proven themselves. And then 3, again, they still have games against Oklahoma State and Baylor. So it leaves the committee, going back to my previous point, it leaves the committee a lot of options. Oklahoma can play themselves in with wins against Oklahoma State, Baylor in a conference championship game, or they can play themselves out with a loss anywhere in there. So I think they do. I don't think the committee is going to punish them for bad losses, because putting them in the top 4 still leaves the committee options. So I think that's your top 4. I think Oklahoma's in there. And then going back to the previous comment about Oregon, I really think it's going to be interesting to see who's higher, Cincinnati or Oregon. I think Ohio State will be higher than Cincinnati, but I'm not sure about Oregon. That might be the one bone the committee throws to Cincinnati, is putting them over a one-loss Pac-12 team in Oregon, just to say, hey, Cincinnati, there is a path to get to the top 4, even though you don't control your own destiny. So those are my thoughts on Oklahoma and Oregon.
About you, Brandon?
Yeah, I don't think Oklahoma will get punished either. Sure, they've had the close games this year, but they still got to play Oklahoma State and Baylor. Like Mike said, they can either play their way in or they can play their way out with a loss in either of those games. And then just back to the Oregon-Ohio State thing with Cincinnati tied in. The interesting thing is Ohio State's going to be ranked above Cincinnati, I believe, but is Oregon above Ohio State or vice versa? So we're right at it. Let's see where they're at.
Yeah, the show is old now, so we're just waiting. Of course, they're talking to Kurt Herbstreit right now to get all his thoughts and get the guys on there. There's just the graphic, 6 undefeated teams remaining. What do we think about Wake Forest here? Where are they at, and what do they probably need to do as the season progresses to maybe, if they're not in top 4, which I don't think any of us think they will be, or anywhere close to it, what do they need to do to perhaps get in there? Do they need teams ahead of them to lose, or could an ACC undefeated Wake Forest as champion get into these 14 playoff?
Well, so I think Wake Forest is in a similar situation as Cincinnati in that they don't control their own destiny. If they win out as an undefeated ACC champion, Wake Forest, they need Michigan State to lose once, or they need Oklahoma to lose once as well. The ACC is down this year. Clearly, Clemson's not who we think they are. Clemson's not who we thought they were. Pittsburgh's had a couple good wins, but they're kind of up and down, looking for some consistency there. An undefeated ACC team probably gets in, but at this point in the season, they don't control their own destiny with an undefeated Oklahoma, an undefeated Georgia, and an undefeated Michigan State still out there. And then, what would be interesting is you have a 13-0 ACC champion Wake Forest, and you have a 13-0 AAC champion Cincinnati. Which one of those teams do you put in? I really think that's, just to kind of reframe your question a little bit, I think that's the scenario that might break the committee's back come championship weekend.
What you
yeah, that would be a big scenario potentially down the road, Mike. Look, I think Wake Forest, obviously they're going to have to finish undefeated, and they're going to need a lot of help, like Mike said. They're going to need Michigan State to lose once. They're going to need Oklahoma to slip up somewhere in there. And then if you have to put up Wake Forest against Cincinnati, I mean, who do you take? That would be the big question at the end of the year before the playoff starts. But Wake Forest, I just think they're a good team, but they're going to have to go undefeated, and they're going to need help.
Yeah, it is kind of just, I just thought about, we talked about name brand earlier. Put Clemson's name with this, because of course they've already ranked high. It's a completely different conversation. It's, the name brand thing. If it's Clemson or even Florida State, because I know Florida State's been bad for a while, but they still have that traditional name brand if you put them in there. And looking at Wake Forest, the rest of the way, they have North Carolina, NC State, at Clemson, Boston College, and the ACC championship game, which, the ACC's down this year, but it looks like their tougher games are ahead of them these next 4 weeks. So we'll see if they go through that undefeated. But I agree with both of you. They're going to need some help. They're going to need some teams to fall in front of them to get in. And that whole, and I hadn't really thought about it the way you just presented it with the Cincinnati versus Wake Forest. They're kind of the same deal, because really, if we strip the conference names away this year, how big of a difference is there between the AAC and the ACC?
So, Phillip, I think that's a great question. Again, I'm not trying to, but just to reframe your question a little bit, going back to my first opening comments about Cincinnati, I think the AAC is weaker this year than it has been. When UCF went through 2 undefeated seasons in the AAC, they were a really strong conference. They were really good. I really think they were probably the third or fourth best conference. I think they were better than the Pac-12 and potentially better through from 12 to 10, probably better than the Big 12. I'm sorry, probably better than Big 12. I don't think the AAC is as strong as they are this year, which again I think kind of hurt Cincinnati a little bit. UCF is clearly down. Navy is clearly down. SMU hasn't showed the firepower that they're capable of, and Houston's very inconsistent. So I think the AAC is down. Obviously, the ACC is down as well. So the question is how far off is the AAC from the ACC? I would tell you it's probably not that far off. Certainly not as much as you would think a group of five conference should be from a Power Five. But then again, I think that says more about the ACC than it does about the AAC this year. In previous years, in those UCF years, I think it said more about the AAC being a much better conference than you would think. This year, I think it's about the ACC being not as good as a conference as it should be.
So they now have released 25 through 21. You have Pittsburgh at 25, San Diego State with one loss at 24. At 23 is Fresno State, 22 is Iowa, and 21 is Wisconsin. So, Jill, with you, Brandon, and then Mike, any thoughts there?
I'm glancing at the TV here too. Wisconsin and Iowa is interesting for me, and then Fresno State and San Diego State right there at 23 and 24. Didn't they play each other last weekend?
Let's see. I'm bad hosting here, but I'm not sure. How about you, Mike? Anything on there? Would you?
Yeah, I think Wisconsin at 21 is really indicative of what I was talking about earlier. Wisconsin has looked pretty bad for several games. They just got hosed by Notre Dame. They got beat up pretty bad, I believe, by Michigan. So Wisconsin at 21. I believe Wisconsin has 3 losses. Correct me if I'm wrong, but having them at 21 gives Michigan State and Ohio State fans gives them a positive momentum going into the top 10 here in a few minutes. That's kind of surprising to me. I did not think Wisconsin would be in the top 25. If you look at just the eye test, as the committee says, Wisconsin should be about 0-7 on the season instead of 4-3, which I believe is their record.
So and now they got 20 through 16 here real quickly. Minnesota at 20, NC State at 19, which would help out Wake Forest. 18 is Kentucky, 17 is Mississippi State, and then at 16 you have Ole Miss. So either one of y'all just go at it.
I think that helps Alabama. I think that's setting up to put Alabama at 3 or 4 right there with wins against Mississippi and Mississippi State. I believe they've played Mississippi State, not off the top of my head. But, I think 16, 17, 18 plus. So, you got Texas A&M to come, probably got Auburn to come as well above that. So that's setting up, again, going back to that 10 to 25 that I said people should be looking for. I think that helps set up an Alabama in the top 4.
How about you, Brandon?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mike. The 2 Mississippi schools being ranked, Bama having to win over both of those currently set Bama up pretty well there in the top 4.
So now we're going through 11 through 15. At 15, you have BYU. At 14, you have Texas A&M. 13, you have Auburn. 12 is Baylor. 11 is Oklahoma State. And, of course, this weekend, Auburn and Texas A&M do play each other, so that's going to be a big matchup. I guess part of me is a little surprised. Auburn is ahead of A&M. A&M with the win against Alabama mainly. But interesting there. Mike, how about you? I'll start with you on this one. Anything sticks out when you look at 11 through 15?
No. I think that's pretty good. You look at Baylor and Oklahoma State. To me, that signals Oklahoma's probably coming in at 4 and not 3. And again, going back to the Alabama thing, you got A&M. So again, that gives the committee options. If A&M loses, then Alabama still gets to play at Auburn, which beats A&M. But if A&M wins, then Alabama's going to have a top 10 loss for whatever that means. So no surprises 11 through 15. I think that's a pretty solid ordering right there.
How about you, Brandon? I noticed the LSU Tigers are not involved yet.
Oh, let's not even go there on this. Yeah, no surprises here with 11 through 15. LSU's probably at like 75 at this point. I don't know. But yeah, no surprises with 11 through 15.
Yeah, I'm just, and the Baylor Oklahoma State. Like I said, for Oklahoma, that's going to increase with the help with them. Obviously, that looks good on their resume if there's a debate. So now we're getting 10 through 6 right now. They have Notre Dame at 10. So, we'll see with Cincinnati. It sounds like Notre Dame and Cincinnati are tied to each other. It feels like, because I know Cincinnati, SMU's coming up later in the year. They're in the top 25 AP coaches, 22, 23, somewhere in there. But yes, they got Notre Dame at number 10.
That surprises me, Phillip. I really thought Notre Dame would be a little bit lower. You look at their overtime win against Florida State, which looks not very good now. You look at the eye test for a couple of those eye tests for a couple of those games. Notre Dame just did not look like a top 10 team. So that kind of surprises me. That gives Cincinnati fans a lot of hope right there.
How about you, Brandon?
Yeah, it certainly does. It surprises me that Notre Dame's in the top 10 too. I wasn't expecting that.
And then here we go at number 9, Wake Forest. They got them at number 9. So they're kind of where they're at in the AP and coaches poll, keeping them right there. So obviously they're going to have some work to do if they want to get in that top 4.
Yeah, they've got work, but there's a path there because a lot of the top 8 are going to play each other. You think Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State. I think 2 of those still have to play Penn State as well. SEC will have to play each other. Alabama and Georgia will probably end up playing each other in championship games. So they have a path. They might not control their own destiny, but they have a path.
Yeah, they do have a path. It'll be interesting to see what it takes for them to get there with them being at 9 right now, but their path is certainly there.
Yeah, I'm just super intrigued, like who's going to be next, who's going to be 8. So, those teams, especially when we get to 6, who's, 5 and 6, that's always an interesting number too as well when you get there with these, is to kind of see where we're going to have all these teams. And like I said, with Wake Forest, and I guess it does help them that NC State got ranked in this thing. Now that, the committee looks at them that as a team that is good, so that they'll have that on their resume if they stay in the rankings once Wake Forest gets that matchup, because they play North Carolina, then they play NC State. So at number 8, I'm kind of surprised here, guys. Oklahoma is at number 8. That's shocking. I cannot believe they got Oklahoma at 8. I just wouldn't have believed they would do that. That is a shocking turn of events here tonight.
I guess the committee sent in a message. I suppose. I don't know. That is shocking to me. It really is. Oklahoma at 8. It's going to be interesting. I mean, so that puts Oklahoma behind Oregon as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we just talked about, will Oklahoma be punished for these close games? And there it is. That's interesting.
That's a resounding yes.
So just a prediction real quick. Who do we think's at 7?
I think it's got to be Oregon, right?
Yeah, I'm going to go Oregon.
Watch they throw Cincinnati up there or something crazy.
I mean, I could see Cincinnati. I think it's Cincinnati or Oregon. I mean, so now you're looking at Cincinnati's probably 6.
If they do punish Oklahoma for close losses, I mean, don't you have to do the same thing for close wins? Don't you do the same thing for Cincinnati? I mean, don't have to equal out. That's the same thing, because they've had some games lately that's been a little bit closer. Everybody wants them to blow everybody out, and they've had some closer games lately.
They struggled against Navy, a Navy team that's down. They struggled against Tulane, the same Tulane team that Oklahoma struggled against. So it would make sense to me that Cincinnati would come in at 7, but we'll see.
Yeah, who knows what the committee they throw they threw a curveball at us here. So I mean, we're just waiting on. All right, number 7 is Michigan.
I was about to say that Michigan could be 7, but
I know a lot of people are fans of the best loss argument, but I think Michigan's got the best loss of any one-loss team, and I think their body of work, talking about the eye test of all the one-loss teams, but possibly to include Alabama, I think Michigan probably has the best eye test, the best body of work out there. So that's kind of surprising to me too. I thought Michigan would be at 5 or 6.
Yeah, honestly, this sounds bad. I had forgot about Michigan as we were going through the top 25. I honestly just forgot about them. And look, they did have a 30-14 lead in that game. I mean, they blew it, and Jim Harbaugh once again lost to a top team. But still, you're right. They've had a good run here. They've had a good season so far, and it was an interesting thing there. I'd honestly forgot about. I feel bad. I forgot about Michigan. there. So it's kind of going to be intriguing now where Michigan State lands. Obviously, they're in the top 6. But if they think that highly of Michigan, you got to think Michigan State at 2. I mean, is a good possibility here.
Yeah, well, my question is Ohio State, Michigan with a loss to Michigan State, and then Ohio State with a loss to Oregon, a one-loss Oregon. I really thought Michigan would be higher than Ohio State based on that. Michigan's got to win against a Pac-12 team in Washington, so I really thought Michigan would be 1 or 2 spots higher than Ohio State, but obviously that's not going to happen.
Yeah, certainly we're going to have Oregon and Ohio State at 5 and 6, right? Either way you swap them. I think it's Oregon and Ohio State at 5 and 6, possibly.
And this whole thing too. Now, when you look at this for Ohio State, look at what they have to close out the season. They have a big matchup with Michigan State, who we think is going to be ranked very high. Okay, now they're doing the top 6. Now they got the top 6 going. Georgia, anybody surprised number 1, which I mean that tongue in cheek, but Georgia's the number 1 team in the country. I'm glad they did that one first. They didn't act like there was drama with number 1.
Yeah, that defense looks really good.
I think still average teams like 6-7 points a game against them. I don't have the exact number, but I know going into last week's game, it was like 6.6 points per game allowed. The defense pretty much turned a 3-0 game with Florida to a 24-0 halftime deficit, and then pretty much put it away. I feel like I've joked with people, if they score 10 points, it's almost just a guaranteed win for them because that defense is so good.
Especially if it's the offense that scores the 10 points, because defense is probably going to get you 10 more.
Mm-hmm. So,
but yeah. Here's the danger you run with Ohio State. You were talking about the rest of Ohio State's season. If you put Cincinnati at 4 and Ohio State wins out, don't you have to jump Ohio State over Cincinnati at the end of the season, especially if they win the Big Ten championship game?
Yeah, I would think so. And we have the number 2 team. It is Alabama. They put Alabama at number 2. I was thinking Alabama 3. I wouldn't have think 4. I wouldn't have thought 2, but I was thinking 3 was a good spot for them this opening rankings. But they got them at number 2, so that's pretty intriguing. There, they think that highly of Alabama, which really, when you think about it, Alabama's best win is against Ole Miss, and they lose to A&M. I'm kind of surprised seeing Alabama at number 2 here. How about you guys?
It looks to me like they're making a statement for the eye test. You have an undefeated Power 5 Oklahoma at 9, right? 9?
8.
8, and a 1-loss Alabama at 2. And their 1 loss was to A&M, which is a solid team, but it's not like it was to Georgia or Michigan State. So to me, it looks like they're going. They're all in on the eye test this year. Oh man, that Alabama at 2 is a little surprising to me. I thought they'd come in at 3, potentially 4.
Yeah, so Bama at 2 is a little surprising.
And then now they just released number 3, and that is Michigan State.
Yeah, I think 2 and 3 obviously doesn't matter because they'll end up playing each other. But I really think Michigan State deserves 2. I'm sure they'll be happy with 3. But going back to Alabama, I think it's interesting. Is Alabama being punished for not being the Alabama of the previous 3 or 4 years, not being the Tua Tagovailoa Alabama, or are they being punished for just being kind of an average Alabama, which is still better than pretty much every other team on the planet? So maybe that's shaping. Maybe the committee doesn't want to be hostage to the previous great Alabama offenses. I don't know.
And they've got of course they got LSU this week, and I'm just going to throw this out there: the Auburn game, especially if they can upset A&M this weekend. I mean, Auburn has a chance to decide a lot of this too. I mean, that's going to be huge there, and I see no chance they beat Georgia if they play in the SEC championship. But Auburn could be a 2-loss team if they did, but I don't see that happening. Okay, now here's number 4, Oregon. They put Oregon at number 4.
What?
Wow, with a loss to Stanford.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Any thoughts, Brandon, on that one?
Mike was just talking about the eye test with Alabama being at 2. What about that now? That Oregon at 4 is a stretch for me. That's a shocker.
Here's the thing I'm sorry, Phillip. Here's the thing with the eye test with Oregon. Some games they look great, but they haven't been consistent. That game against Stanford, they just looked off. There was one other game I can't think of off the top of my head where they weren't, they just kind of, they weren't dominant. So a one-loss Oregon with a loss to Stanford over an undefeated Oklahoma, I'm not sure that makes sense. Just seeing it right now, might have to process that one a little bit. All right, sorry to interrupt, Phillip.
Oh yeah, they struggled against UCLA.
Yeah,
they had to kind of kick it into a different gear just to get by UCLA. They won that game 34-31. 31-24 lost to Stanford a couple weeks ago. And I was not sure of them after the first game when they struggled with Fresno State, put no pressure on the quarterback. Quarterback lit them up. I mean, they only won that game 31-24. Now, of course, next week they beat Ohio State 35-28. Looked very impressive. But they're kind of in a way, they kind of got the Oklahoma thing going for them. They're really good. We know they are, but it seems like sometimes they play down to the level of their competition.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So
we're waiting on 5 and 6 here. I just who are we thinking here?
I think Ohio State's got to be 5.
They are. They just, as soon as I say ask the question to you guys, it's like they're listening. It's okay. They went ahead and put 5 and 6. Ohio State is 5 and Cincinnati is number 6.
So I think the statement to Cincinnati is just like Wake Forest. Hey, you guys have a path, but like Brandon said earlier, you got to win out. Ohio State, Michigan State will remove one of those spots above them. You still have Oklahoma lurking at 8 as an undefeated team. You got to think if Oklahoma wins out and is undefeated Big 12 champion, you got to think they're in. Even if they have to jump a Cincinnati team. So you're thinking Oklahoma probably jumps at least 3 spots over a Cincinnati team. Well, I guess at the end of the season, maybe they're jumping 1 or 2 spots over. But I think that's setting college football fans up for some drama, potential drama come championship weekend, and the final releasings come out Saturday night after the conference championship games are over. Very interesting. It's certainly going to give us a lot to talk about over the next week.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what these things do. And Brandon, your thoughts with 5 and 6 being Ohio State and Cincinnati?
Yeah, like Mike said, I think that obviously the Ohio State Michigan State game is probably going to knock one of those out, and then Cincinnati's got a path. You just got to win out. Same thing with Wake Forest, potentially with Oklahoma too. My biggest thing is right now, if this was the week prior to conference championship week, if Oregon wins out and if Oklahoma wins out, and say Cincinnati drops or something, would you put a one-loss Oregon right now in over an undefeated Oklahoma? I think that could be a big question down the road that would be very interesting to me.
Well, when you look at Oregon's remaining schedule, they play at Washington this week, who's 4-4. They have Washington State the following week, who's 5-4 at the moment. Then they're at Utah, who's 5-3. Then they play Oregon State, who's 5-3 as well. Now, I've got the rest of Oklahoma's schedule in front of me. They have, like you said earlier, at Baylor. They play at home against Iowa State, at Oklahoma State. Of course, they would play in the Big 12 championship game in a rematch against somebody that they played this year. Of course, Oregon's looking to get to the Pac-12 championship game. So this is me, in my opinion, when you look at those remaining schedules, if both teams win out, you have to think at some point Oklahoma has to jump over Oregon.
I agree with you. Baylor's got 1 loss. Oklahoma State's got 1 loss. Iowa State's got 3 losses. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, they've already got 3 on the season.
So I mean that's 2 really good quality wins. So 2 top 15 wins, and then another solid win. So Oklahoma would be jumping Oregon, you would think, and probably every other team between them and the 4 slot. So you look at that, and I think you're right there. You got me started thinking about Auburn, 2 losses, but I think they only have 1 loss in the SEC. So then you start looking at the SEC West. I think Cincinnati's nightmare, Wake Forest's nightmare, Oklahoma's nightmare is a 1-loss Alabama, or potentially a 2-loss SEC West champ Auburn after beating Alabama, goes into the SEC championship game and then beats Georgia. So then the SEC, particularly if it's Alabama, a one-loss Alabama beats a one-loss Georgia in the SEC championship game, that's 2 slots locked up right there. And then Phillip, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. A 2-loss Auburn beats Alabama. They're in the conference championship game, head-to-head with Alabama. The other one loss is out of conference. They somehow beat undefeated Georgia. Georgia's going to be in. Does a 2-loss Auburn that runs the table after suffering 2 early season losses to 2 quality teams, did they somehow wiggle their way in after beating Georgia? That would be really the nightmare for those teams at 6 through 10, I think.
Well, it's not much different than what 2017 would have been if they beat Georgia twice, because they had back-to-back games against number 1 teams. But then you'd have back-to-back games against Alabama. If they keep winning, they should stay at 2. So you beat the number 2 team in the country, and we know the committee likes Alabama. And then at number 1, the next week at number 1, you've got Georgia. So you beat the number 1 and number 2 teams in back-to-back weeks, and then you've got wins against other ranked teams. You've got a win against A&M, which is if they win this weekend, and then you had a ranked win against Ole Miss. Look, Mississippi State, they're thought highly now. I mean, they're in the top 25. You got them on your schedule. So honestly, if we were going to get a 2-loss team, if Auburn runs the table, look, I don't think I'm leaning A&M this week, and if they play Georgia again, I don't really think they could beat Georgia. But just say if that happened, I don't see how you keep a 2-loss Auburn team out with that resume, and especially with a close loss to what is was a really good Penn State team at the time.
Yeah, sure, and that's a great point. If they do end up beating Georgia, that will avenge their one conference. So that's a great point. And based on the committees. The committee obviously doesn't value Oklahoma or Wake Forest's undefeated record right now. So it would make you think that the dark horse candidate for the CFP right now is Auburn. They're probably the lowest team that has a clear path. They're assuredly, most definitely. I don't want to say that. They're probably the lowest ranked team that has a path to the playoff. They don't control their own destiny. Well, I guess kind of they do control their own destiny. I guess they're probably the lowest ranked team that controls their own destiny. I think if they went out, avenging their one conference loss, beating the number 1 and number 2 teams in consecutive weeks, I think they punched their ticket. I think they do. They're probably the lowest. They're probably one of the few teams that control their own destiny right now with 2 losses. That's pretty interesting. That was a great point you brought up, Phillip.
Yeah, it's just very interesting, and I'll throw this out there for you, both of you. Say if A&M, I'm just going to throw a crazy scenario since we got on the Auburn SEC train here. Let's just say A&M beats Auburn this week, and then Auburn was to upset Alabama in that last game, and then A&M goes to the SEC championship game and upset Georgia. Anyway, either one of you think A&M could get in the playoff with 2 losses that way?
No.
Who would A&M's 2 losses be to?
It would be to Mississippi State and to Arkansas, who Arkansas is not in this ranking.
No.
Mississippi State is.
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I don't think they would either.
Yeah, I lean that way, but since we're with the 2-loss SEC teams here, I was just going to throw that out there. So, and of course, just kind of looking at it real quickly, of course, Ohio State and Michigan State will play each other in a few weeks, and then Michigan's down the road. So the Big Ten part of it will figure itself out. And then, of course, we talked about Oklahoma, of course, Cincinnati, Wake Forest, Georgia's at the top, Alabama too. As we kind of, this first rankings release kind of close things up here. Any other big takeaways or any thoughts with this whole rankings here, the first rankings of the college football season?
I think to me, the biggest surprise is Oklahoma and being a Power 5 undefeated team with kind of the resume they have. So that's the biggest takeaway for me. I think the committee got it right with Cincinnati at 6. It leaves themselves options going forward. So I think they got it right with Cincinnati. I think the biggest takeaway, the biggest surprise was Oklahoma at 8.
What you, Brandon?
Yeah, I think that's my biggest takeaway too. Phillip, I was going to say something about what if LSU upset Alabama this weekend and just messed everything up, but
Well, I'm trying to stay in reality. I'm trying to stay in reality here on this Tuesday evening.
Very unlikely to happen, but look, college football is a chaotic thing, and anything can happen. But Oklahoma is the biggest surprise. I think Auburn, if they win this weekend, they'll control their own destiny, obviously. So that'll be interesting to watch. And then Oregon at 4 just kind of surprised me too.
That's a good point. Yeah, Oregon at 4 is probably as big of a surprise as Oklahoma. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's me. And then honestly, I kind of get my thoughts when we kicked this thing off. I was thinking maybe they would put Cincinnati in the top 4, but they didn't. And for them, that was kind of surprised me. And I'm with both of you. Oklahoma is a surprise. I mean, when I saw that on the TV screen as we were talking here, as you guys were breaking your thoughts down, I was shocked. I was just very surprised Oklahoma was there. I would have been shocked enough if they weren't in the top 4, but I would figure they'd be one of the 5 in the 5 or 6 spot, not all the way to 8. So they got work to do. But of course, as we know, a lot of this stuff will play itself out. So that's y'all's final thoughts on the rankings. Just any overall final thoughts as we close it up.
This is why college football is the best. Endless debate, and it's not a finite formula. Just why college football is the best. This right here. Thanks for having me tonight, Phillip.
Oh, anytime. Glad to have you all, Mike. How about you, Brandon?
Yeah, Phillip, this is where the real chaos in college football begins, is when the playoff rankings come out. So we'll see what happens over the next 3 or 4 weeks going into championship week.
All right, everybody. Sounds good. Anywhere anybody could follow any of you guys, especially you, Brandon, anything like that?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Heisman Eisman. You can also find all my LSU content over at Last Word on College Football. You can get the LSU Breakdown podcast on Apple Podcasts, Anchor, and Spreaker. You can check out Beyond the Bleachers every Thursday night. We do it on Facebook Live, and that one's also on Apple Podcasts.
Anything for you to plug, Mike?
Yeah, you can catch me at Twitter at MikeL_LWS. That's Last Word on Sports. Check out my friends, including Brandon there, at Last Word on College Football. And then you can always catch me providing Tennessee high school scores to Phillip's Wiregrass reports down there in Alabama. I don't think he actually uses them, but I always like to throw in a little Middle Tennessee scores to the Wiregrass report sometimes on Friday nights. But Twitter at MikeL_LWS, and make sure you give the team a look over there at Last Word on College Football.
I always appreciate it, Mike. I appreciate the effort showed in the high school scores there. That's what I asked for. I don't ever specify where we're at. So there you go. You're following directions. For me, everybody know you can follow me at PJordanSEC and podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. And if people are watching the tail end of this and you want to hear audio, this will be up on the podcast as well in the audio form. But Brandon and Mike, I do appreciate y'all taking the time out to come on. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
I'll talk to you later, guys.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, Phillip.